Lord Truscott.
My Lords, in opening this debate, I'd like to declare a non-pecuniary interest as Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Shale Gas Regulation and Planning, and as former UK Energy Minister. This is a controversial subject, and no doubt your Lordships have and will hear many different views. Hydraulic fracturing, fracking, is a technological reality and cannot be uninvented. It is also clear that the government, and quite frankly Parliament as a whole, is determined to develop shale gas in the UK. The question is whether this development has been thoroughly thought through in all its ramifications, and as we inexorably move towards exploration and production. Andrea Leeson, Minister of State for Energy at the time, said in May 2016, shale gas could, quote, provide jobs for our people and tax revenues for society, help the UK to decarbonise while we move away from coal to lower carbon energy sources, secure energy, economic growth and job creation. The suggestion has been that shale gas development could create between 60 to 70,000 jobs, stimulate billions of pounds of investment in the UK, provide energy security and help secure a bridge to a greener future. On the face of it, these arguments seem compelling, except that none of the statements are quite as straightforward as they initially sound. Let me start with energy security. The assumption here is that we lack it, and the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee report into shale specifically referred to the reliance on Russia, Europe's biggest gas supplier. The only problem here, my Lords, is that the UK imports virtually no gas from Russia and is unlikely to import significant amounts in the future. In a written reply to me on this subject last September, Baroness Neville Rolfe, the Minister, responded, quote, there are no pipelines that allow Russian gas to flow from Norway, our biggest source of imports, all via shipped liquefied national gas, which comes mainly from Qatar. Some gas of Russian origin may enter via pipelines from Belgium and the Netherlands. However, Belgium has reported virtually no Russian gas imports over the past 3 years. The Netherlands does report some Russian imports, but we estimate Russian gas via this route would account for less than 1% of the UK's gas imports, and therefore much less than 1% of our total gas supply. In fact, the UK has now started receiving direct imports of US LNG, so unless we regard Norway and the US as unreliable partners, the energy security argument does not stack up. Of course, it is always better economically to have our own gas than import it, and there may be some environmental benefits if the amount of carbon produced is less, but that is by no means currently certain. On the billions of pounds for investment and thousands of jobs, this is presently speculative. Hopes of commercial-scale shale in Poland have faded, and many of the majors have already pulled out. The number of licenses halved, and those leaving include Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, Talisman and Marathon. Put simply, UK shale may or may not be commercially viable. No one will know until large-scale exploration establishes a level of exploitable reserves. This is, of course, a matter for the companies involved, but the experience in Poland shows that you should not count your chickens or your prospective tax take. As for the thousands of jobs, these may or may not just replace those lost in the North Sea already, partly as a result of the hydrocarbon glut and price collapse caused by the US shale revolution in the first place. UK oil and gas estimates 120,000 jobs have been lost in the wider British economy due to North Sea oil and gas downturn, with the barrel of crude falling from around about $115 to around $50 since 2014, with a close correlation with gas prices. The US has also experienced the boom and ghost town experience, where some shale operators who initially did well went bust in the downturn, impacting on local economies. Significant shale UK production and downward pressure on prices could further undermine North Sea operators and squeeze margins in what is already one of the most expensive places in the world to exploit oil and gas. So what about a bridge to a greener future and the effect on the environment? Well, my lords, this is one of the most contentious issues of all. No doubt the noble Lord the Minister will repeat that the UK's regulations are some of the strongest in the world. And we have 50 years of successful and safe onshore and offshore oil and gas extraction. Shale gas developments will be very closely monitored. Shallow drilling will be banned and seismic movements monitored. All true, no doubt, but as Piper Alpha, Deepwater Horizon and Exxon Valdez disasters showed, accidents do happen. No hydrocarbon explorer or producer can 100% guarantee the integrity of its wells, even if they are much deeper than aquifers. Water contamination is possible, and earthquakes are inevitable. We have had several hundred already in the UK as a result of mining operations, quite apart from the notorious quadrilla quakes outside Blackpool. In the US, they have had thousands of earthquakes, now indisputably linked to fracking. I'm still unsure how the UK will avoid the same fate as the US, so perhaps the Minister will use this opportunity to explain. By the very nature of fracking and unconventional gas, where production falls off after 18 months, the UK will need to develop thousands, not hundreds, of shale gas wells. This has caused problems in the wide open spaces of the US. How will this work in the densely populated island of ours? What about the truck movements? In the US, the environmental picture has not been great. In Oklahoma in 2014, they experienced 585 earthquakes with a magnitude of 3 and over. According to the US Geological Survey, these were caused by the disposal of wastewater re-injected into the wells by the shale operators. A study by the University of Alberta, co-authored by the Geological Survey of Canada, confirmed the definitive link between fracking and almost every large earthquake recorded in Alberta and British Columbia since 1985. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection reported that 234 private drinking water wells in Pennsylvania have been contaminated by drilling and fracking operations in the last 7 years. Meanwhile, a US Environment Protection Agency scientist identified groundwater pollution in Pavilion, Wyoming as a result of fracking. A separate report in April 2016 concluded, quote, dangerous levels of chemicals in the underground water supply used by 230 residents of Pavilion. Levels of benzene, a flammable liquid used in fuel, were 50 times above the allowable limit, while chemicals were dumped in unlined pits and cement barriers to protect groundwater were inadequate. Last week, the leadership of the Pawnee Nation, a Native American tribe, filed a lawsuit against multiple Oklahoma oil companies, claiming their operations caused a 5.8 magnitude earthquake. Furthermore, there's serious concern about the amounts of methane released during fracking. Recent attempts in the US under President Obama to limit methane emissions look likely to be overturned by President Trump. Of course, the industry will tell us it will all be different in the UK. It cannot happen here. The US is different and the regulations will be tighter. Perhaps the Minister would like to comment further. However, some states and regions think differently. Maryland in the US has put a moratorium on fracking, as have Scotland, Northern Ireland and France. Fracking was banned in New York in December 2014. What do they know that we don't? Or does Her Majesty's government have a monopoly on wisdom on this subject? The UK's Labour Party also supports banning fracking. Shadow Energy Minister Barry Gardiner stating, quote, the real reason to ban fracking is that it locks us into an energy infrastructure that is based on fossil fuels long after our country needs to have moved to clean energy. My Lords, we will continue to be dependent on fossil fuels in the foreseeable future, at least up until 2040 or 2050. Her Majesty's government is committed to reducing our carbon emissions by at least 80% by 2050 compared to 1990 levels. Professor Kevin Anderson, former director of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, has said, quote, from a climate change perspective, this stuff simply has to stay in the ground. The Environment Audit Committee reported in 2015 that, quote, ultimately, fracking cannot be compatible with our long-term commitments to cut climate change emissions unless full-scale carbon capture and storage technology is rolled out rapidly, which currently looks unlikely. The Climate Change Committee also thought the implications for UK shale gas exploration and exploitation for greenhouse emissions was subject to considerable uncertainty and are not compatible with the UK carbon budgets unless strict measures are taken. Finally, my lords, the recent survey showed only 19% of people back shale exploration in the UK, despite the various inducements offered to local communities. The Financial Secretary to the Treasury said in the other place last November that the Prime Minister has been very clear that local people must come first. Will the Minister therefore pledge that local communities will in future decide local planning issues?